Hey, Jason Bluto here, owner of Blue Tactical. Thanks for tuning in again. Really appreciate you supporting the channel. Remember to subscribe so you get these as soon as they come out. Like it, share it with your friends. Help me get the word out about good firearms and scenario-based time compressed training. Got an exciting interview for you today. Buddy of mine who works out of DC. He's a professional military aviator who flies DVs, or the most important people in the most powerful country in the world. And I talked to him specifically about being some of the highest trained pilots in the world and how they use simulators to train and the value of that training. And then we talk a little bit about relating it back to training that we do at Blue Tactical, and firearms training and scenario-based training, so that you can see the scenario before you're in the scenario. So buckle up for this interview. Appreciate you joining us. Hey, thanks. Thanks for meeting with me today. My goal, like I told you, is to kind of open people's aperture on the use of simulation in training, and show that a lot of professionals, both in the civilian sector and military, use simulation as part of their training. And I know for you guys, pilots, like I said in the intro, you're a professional military aviator, still actively doing that. So we can't be super specific on what you're doing because it's all secret squirrel.
Yeah, sure.
I just want to have a conversation with you to open people up to that. So how many years have you been flying in the military, and can you give us just a little bit of background on your assignments?
Yeah, sure. So just going back to the Wayback Machine, I've been interested in aviation since I was about 4 years old. I went to first air show then, and it just really clicked in. It's like I either want to do that or be an NBA basketball player. But I stopped growing when I was about 12 years old, so that didn't really work out. So kept on with the aviation thing. Went to ROTC, East Carolina, down in North Carolina, commissioned through them. Went out to North Dakota, spent some time there, casual status. Realized I didn't really helicopter pilot at that point. Out in Oklahoma, spent a year out there. Then got to go do heavy airlift. Came back to the East Coast, did that for a while in New Jersey. Spent about 3 years there. Went down to Charleston, did 3 years there, and then I got lucky enough to pick up for DV airlift out of Washington D.C. And I was there for about 4 years. And as my wife likes to joke, now I'm a penguin doing a staff gig still in DC. And then hopefully later this year I'll go back to flying again and get back into that. So it's been a wild ride. Never thought we'd been on out here in the East Coast for this long, or in DC for this long, but it's great. It's what I've always wanted to do. So
Yeah, cool. So you fly very important people around. But so basically, so would you say in the military and in like your current role that you're probably the highest trained pilot in the world, and have to be?
that's the goal. The unit I was actually actively flying with up here before, they only advertise to people that do heavy airlift, that have lots of hours, and they're looking for highly experienced people because obviously what you do in that unit really makes the news, and any kind of mess up you have in that situation is uh, it just does not work out well for anybody. That's the thing my wife always used to say when I go to work there. It would be whatever you do, don't make the news. Wouldn't fly safe or anything like that. Is like, just don't make the news.
Right. So yeah. So and obviously you're flying important people in the most powerful country in the world, right? So you don't, anything
Exactly.
you do that would be bad would make the news. But backing up to your initial start in military aviation, what was the first experience you had in using simulators for flight training?
That's the fun part. They really don't trust you in the aircraft right away. So we started out in the simulator. So I lucked out. A lot of people pay for their own flight training and do things like that. I've never paid for a flight hour in my life. It's all been through the military. Did some initial Cessna stuff before I got to pilot training, and then so they do throw you into a Cessna right away like that. But other than that, you go out to pilot training, you do 6 weeks of ground school, and then they start simulator training. And they start off in a stair-stepped approach with that, just like anything. So you start off with no movement, just here's the switches and everything like that. To all right, now there's some movement, and you've got like a almost like a 360-degree view above you to work around, and it's just to get you comfortable because literally the first thing I ever flew, it was actually a Piper Cherokee Warrior, a 1970 Piper Cherokee Warrior, so not a lot of horsepower, got basically a golf cart engine in it, and then you go to a 1200 horsepower T6 that honestly at that point you're just holding on for dear life because you don't know what the aircraft's going to do. So they start you out in the simulator to kind of get you warmed up and get your hands ready to understand what the aircraft's going to do before you actually get in it.
Okay, wow. So you would say the purpose and the goal of it is one to just get you comfortable and really take away, maybe mitigate the risk and the and costs associated with training so that there's no accidents.
And there's definitely that, and that's the big thing. Obviously, cost mitigation and just making things safer. Now, this I went through pilot training in 2007 to 2008. Now they're starting this whole new program where it's going to go even more in depth to simulator training. So uh, they've expanded it more and more. And I don't know, I'm not the expert on like what they're doing right now, but that's the future of military flight training is simulator training.
Okay. Yeah, which well makes a lot of sense with unmanned aircraft and all that. But
Yeah.
right, I mean, so I mean, you're saying so there's a lot of value there, and the military's doubling down on that.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, between uh, flight hours add up on an aircraft. So anytime you can do the training on a simulator that is the same accomplished as on an aircraft, and then I mean, it's not just aviation gas. You can just see what's going on with any kind of gas when you're driving down the street, how much it costs now. So each that cost per flight hour is going up when you're actually in a cockpit.
Okay. So how would you, I mean, you're a shooter, right? You carry you're a handgun guy and um what would you say? So knowing both shooting and flying and then having that simulator experience, I know I haven't had you in and you haven't had any experience in my place, but what would you say would be the value that would translate from flight simulation over to like firearm simulation and scenario based training?
Well, I'd say it kind of goes back to it's a saying in flying that there are old pilots and there are bold pilots, but there are no old bold pilots. So firearms training or simulator training in an aircraft, it really boils down to the fact is you get to make the mistakes that you just don't know what you don't know. So you get to make those mistakes, learn from them, and you're still alive, unlike the last generation who didn't have these opportunities uh, to go learn from, have some wisdom built up, and then go and be safer, more accurate in the future. So I think it lines up perfectly with both firearms and aircraft.
Yeah, and you guys do so, so like one of the things I emphasize and I'll put people into is like their worst day scenario, right? So they're actually interacting with a hostile person, having to identify like some threatening behaviors, and then ultimately they're maybe get a shooting, not in a shooting, but put them in a circumstance that they ordinarily every day wouldn't get in, and the cost is extremely high if they are in those, right? Because it's life or death. Do you guys do any kind of training like that in your simulator, like worst case scenario and kind of to see how the pilots do?
Very much so. So the way it goes in larger aircraft, like when you're flying a smaller aircraft, they'll cut the engine on you and stuff like that because you've got more options. You can put it down anywhere, but you're flying around in a 585,000 pound aircraft. You can't just put that down anywhere. So we don't do any of our emergency procedures in the aircraft. We only do it in the simulator. So from anytime you do a check ride, you have to do an engine out scenario to a go around, which doesn't sound like it's that big a deal, but in an aircraft that large, when you have asymmetric thrust like that, it can really cause some issues if you do it the wrong way. So we do that in simulators to keep that safe, make sure you know what you're doing. And even so, when I was flying a 4-engine aircraft before, they actually went as far as to fail 2 engines on takeoff and show you that it's not comfortable, but that you can actually bring it around and land if you do everything just right. And we obviously have procedures set up for a normal scenario, and the point of that scenario specific was that you can't follow normal procedures. You have to do things ahead of time because I can talk about lift and drag all day long, but you have to clean up the aircraft. There's slats and flaps on a large aircraft. You have to clean up earlier than you normally would when you lose that, and that's the only way you can make it. And it's really not comfortable, but it's something you would never do in the aircraft. But if it ever actually happened to you in the aircraft, it gives you the confidence to know what to do in that situation.
So yeah, so we talk about this in firearms all the time, open versus closed training, like your static stuff is closed, open is your dynamic. So what you probably shoot for in everyday flying and missions is everything's predictable. You have checklists and you hope that everything goes just as planned. But the simulator really just prepares you for the dynamic stuff that is unpredictable and you have to make quick decisions on, right?
Exactly. And I mean, it's everything from weather. Like you want to go out and we do, we're all instrument rated, obviously. You go fly your normal local, you may have to simulate the weather, which isn't really simulated because you can still see out there no matter what. We don't put blinders on when we're actually flying the aircraft. But when you go into the simulators, whether it's they have the normal ILS is what you fly, normally has a ceiling of 300 feet, and there's a category 2 ILS which can go down to 50 feet, and then they have cat 3 ILSs that can go all the way down to 0 0. You don't see anything, which is hard to train to because it's hard to go find that weather. And once again, we go back into the simulator and create that so you actually have that sight picture when, in no kidding, you're going to Germany and oh, guess what? You go into the clouds at 300 feet, you don't come out till 50 feet because it's the morning fog like it is every
That's cool. So so all of that dynamic training that you've got in a simulator, does that make you a better pilot in a real aircraft? And I guess, does it help you the more you make those being forced to make time compressed decisions like that in a simulator? Does that help you in the real world and with the day to day and maybe even the minor decisions?
Oh, most definitely. Because I mean, you've already got a habit set up for worst case scenario, and with that worst case scenario, it's just once again it goes back to habit patterns. I go out to the jet. It's 2 hours prior. What am I doing? And that sets up everything up into takeoff, and I'm taxiing out, you're going to take the runway, and I know, all right, what's the worst case scenario here? How am I prepared for that? And that's already in the head. It's not something like it's not something I have to worry about. I'm already prepared for because I've done the simulator, and it just gives you the confidence. And when bad things happen, which they do, it's happened to me. I know I was actually in Djibouti, a flock of birds, and thought I lost 2 engines, only lost one, but it's one of those things that just goes back to muscle memory, habit pattern. Go through the checklist, come back and land uneventfully, and here we are still today.
Oh, that's cool. So you had like engine failures in the simulator, and so when it really happens, it's not, your brain doesn't know the difference between fake and real.
Exactly, that's the exact thing. It's obviously a little different. Like you have to figure out what exactly is going on with each emergency, but it translates no matter what. You know what my wife and I like to joke around that she's ADHD and can't. She's very creative and has a creative brain, whereas my head's like a Excel spreadsheet. So literally like Control F. All right, here's what's going on. We lost an engine, and this is step A through Z that you need to accomplish to get back on the ground safely. And that's exactly what simulator trainer sets you up for. Because literally, the first time we put on motion in a large jet, you go through, you learn how to land, and then you start doing failures.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And in yeah, so it makes sense that if they put you in situations that are difficult and dynamic, that the procedural normal stuff would be easy, right? It kind of makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. And how often do you guys do your simulator training as part of your regular training regimen?
So it depends. There are different categories of pilots in terms of experience. There's like category, I think it's A, B, C. And so as you move up, you have to do less, but typically a minimum once a quarter. Some aircraft are more than that. Sometimes they're once a month. There's all sorts of training tables and stuff like that. You always have to do your 1-1-1, whether it be in the simulator or in the jet, which is a takeoff and landing and an instrument approach to keep yourself current every 30 days. But at minimum, at least once a quarter, if you're in that highest category, down to as much as once a month when you're a brand new co-pilot.
Okay. And do they view it more as training or assessment when you're in the simulator?
So it's both. When you go for your normal quarterly or monthly sim, that's training. And then, like we were talking about earlier, you do your instrument check ride in the simulator. So that's once every year to 18 months, you go in there and do all that. And that's a true assessment. It's all on you and your co-pilot that you're flying with to fly out the scenario to a safe conclusion. And that's how you're assessed.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, you have check rides in the normal aircraft, but then check rides for emergency procedures in the sim. And it's,
Exactly. And then
yeah.
that's all recorded. And when I one day maybe jump to the civilian side, every single check ride I've taken for the past 16 years will be there for them to see like how I did on, because it's truly an assessment.
Cool, man. Is there anything I didn't ask you about the simulator that you think is super valuable as far as training, that would maybe translate to other careers or other, I guess, functions that have sims as part of the training?
I think it's definitely something we definitely do in there. It's the what if scenario, and it goes from everything to the two engine stuff we were talking about before, where it's actually plausible to, oh, can I fly this large T-tailed aircraft under the Golden Gate Bridge? You can, by the way, it does actually work out.
It,
But
it
yeah,
doesn't work out.
no, it does work out. We made it. We made it under just fine. It didn't get the red screen of death or anything.
That's
Done that in a few different simulators.
yeah.
But it's the great what if. Kind of like a rental car, except for you aren't going to rip a transmission out. So it's just anything you can think of, you can do. Basically, the limit is yours or your instructor's imagination.
Yeah, it's very, and that's good. It's very similar to what we do. And then, what I think is great is you don't know your limitations until you're sitting in that seat and put in those situations, right? I mean, have you
Mm-hmm.
seen people like totally freeze up the first time, but eventually after a few more sessions, get to where they can function and make good time compressed decisions?
Exactly. We had uh, a lady that came from another aircraft, a propeller-driven aircraft that was much slower, came over to our jet aircraft and was really struggling with it. And just between the fact of descents, trying to get into places, and how much quicker everything moves, and it was definitely one thing that helped finally get through was going to the simulator training and seeing, all right, this is our 2-to-1 descent schedule or anything like that. So it definitely helps slow it down to help everybody understand where they need to be and eventually translate to the aircraft.
Okay. Well, and then how quickly do you think your skills would atrophy if, say, left the simulator and didn't do emergency procedures? Do you feel like your skills would atrophy over time? That
Well, we'll find out when I go to requal here this fall, won't we? It will have been 3 years when I do it. Whenever I go back this fall, so that'll be maybe a follow. But definitely, it is. It's muscle memory. It's like we were talking about before. It gives you that chance to just set up those good habit patterns and whatnot.
okay. And so ongoing. Do civilians do this as well? Civilian pilots?
They do. I can't speak too much to the like private pilots. I mean, it costs money obviously to do simulator training, so it's on each individual private pilot. But Gulfstream has their own simulators up and down the East Coast and out in Colorado, a few other places. Every major airline has their own setup somewhere in different places. We've done some training with them as well, which it's really good. But any professional pilot has done simulator training and has done a check ride in a sim if they hold a commercial license.
Okay, that's cool. It's good to know. Well, thanks, Don. I really appreciate the time today and talking through this, through sims and professional training and the use of sims with military aircraft. So really appreciate it again.
Thanks, Jason. It's my pleasure.
All right, thanks, man. Bye.
Yeah, man.
Hey, thanks again for watching. Hope you found it valuable. And remember, the best way to be prepared is to be trained.
Drop it, drop it.